Much like live-action anime adaptations, video game movies have had a bad rap, but ever since Pokemon Detective Pikachu, there's been a spate of watchable video game movies that have managed to change some minds on the concept. The movie we're talking about today follows that positive trend if it does slip up along the way. Resident Evil Death Island. Resident Evil Death Island follows on from the 2017 film Resident Evil Vendetta and the 2021 miniseries Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. Full disclosure, I haven't seen either of those, so I will treat any references to previous events as though they have sufficient world building and setup from the previous two outings in the series. The plot follows four familiar Resident Evil protagonists investigating a T-virus infection that behaves differently from the usual zombie viruses that we're used to. The zombies cannot infect others through bites and scratches. This means that the zombies are not vectors for further infection and cannot cause a widespread outbreak. In short, they're created by a controlling hand. Jill Valentine and Chris and Claire Redfield soon find out that these zombies have one thing in common. They were all tourists who visited Alcatraz Island recently. The fourth protagonist, Leon S. Kennedy, is tracking the kidnapping of one Dr. Antonio Taylor, a robotics engineer who's been charged with selling state secrets to foreign powers. This brings all four protagonists to Alcatraz with a group of tourists who almost immediately become zombified in record time. After fighting off the zombies, they explore the abandoned prison to find the mastermind behind it all, Dylan Blake. Dylan used to be a part of Umbrella but broke off from them after having to kill his best friend after he became infected by the T-virus. Disillusioned with institutions and authorities, he wants to use his T-virus to remake the world in his image. He's assisted by Maria Gomez, the daughter of Diego Gomez, an antagonist killed by Chris and Leon in Resident Evil Vendetta. The secret of the new T-virus is revealed to be tiny mosquito-like bio-drones that can be directed using a targeting system created by Dr. Antonio Taylor. After support arrives and vaccines are given to the protagonist, they chase down Dylan Blake and corner him. In true Resident Evil fashion, he dives into the water to fuse with a giant shark-like zombie to become a huge monster that the protagonists now have to defeat. Jill reprograms the bio-drones to inject the monster and weaken it, while the other three use the weapons stashed at the island to finally defeat it. Resident Evil Death Island is almost everything a video game movie needs to be. It has cool monsters, fun action sequences, and tense moments. It's entertaining the whole way through, provided you think more about your popcorn than you do the movie. But it's also a series of missed opportunities and some weak writing. This iteration of the T-virus was smartly written to be used by an antagonist with clarity of purpose. He didn't want to use a self-replicating virus that would bring a city to its knees, but rather a bioweapon that could target people with near-surgical precision, although that stance seems to get more muddled every time he opens his mouth. So he removed the virus's ability to transmit itself through bites and scratches, which ties in very well into Dylan Blake's backstory. His best friend was infected through a bite during the Raccoon City incident of 1998, forcing Dylan to kill him. This event scarred him terribly, even causing him to bang his cane on the ground, which echoes the sounds of him bashing his friend's skull in. This is a deeply disturbed person whose trauma leads back to one single awful event. The zombie types in this film are varied, interesting, and adapted to their environment. The majority of the film takes place on Alcatraz Island, so we have a few zombie types that thrive underwater. Claire Redfield is told of an orca with a giant bite taken out of its head, and the T-virus was discovered in this wound. The damage was dealt by a shark-like zombie that lurks the waters around Alcatraz Island, and eventually Dylan Blake fuses with it to become a giant zombie monster. Other than this, we have the Lickers, an amphibious type of zombie that are completely blind and can only detect movement. To make up for this failing, they are strong swimmers and have long tongues that they can use to catch and drag their prey, hence the name. Finally, we have a non-combat type of Licker zombie that are used as submerged incubators for Dr. Taylor's bio-drones. And of course we have the typical walker, although they do seem to be a bit more agile than normal here. The biggest issues with Death Island can be summarized in 2 words: missed opportunities. How much of this is driven by budget constraints I do not know, because Death Island has a very small theatrical release outside of Japan and was simultaneously released on VOD and physical discs. Most of its projected revenue seems to come from merchandising. That said, budget isn't an excuse for failing to use the concepts and resources you have introduced in your film. The liquors aren't used other than in one short action sequence, and the large shark zombie doesn't appear at all except in the beginning and the climax. Islands are unique locations compared to most places that you can set your movie. Cut off from the mainland and surrounded on all sides by water, islands are a great way to restrict resources from your protagonists and make it harder for them to leave dangerous situations. But these qualities are never really used, and the protagonist might as well have been at any location on the mainland. Death Island introduces us to zombies that are brilliant at navigating water, and the protagonists never have to deal with them on a boat or in the ocean. The prison aspect of the film isn't used well either. Prisons are built with several ways to restrict access to areas, but the characters are able to move about with ease. At least the cells are used to imprison a few of the protagonists temporarily. When you have these sorts of unique and interesting locations with distinct qualities that can impact your plot, not utilizing them properly is downright criminal. The missed opportunities extend to the characters as well. Jill Valentine is racked with guilt over being brainwashed by Wesker to attack her friends, and while this is mentioned, there's no real development or closure for her problems. This looks worse because Dylan Blake's trauma is well established, but Jill's just isn't. Dylan's entire worldview changes and he embarks on a quest bordering on world domination because of his trauma, while Jill doesn't act any differently to the other protagonists because of hers. Another wasted character is Maria Gomez, the daughter of a character that was killed in the first film, so she had a real desire to take revenge on the protagonists, but she's largely silent throughout the film. She has very good motivations to hate our protagonists, but these aren't explored or even vocalized much at all. Maria Gomez is reduced to just being a henchman for Dylan Blake. There are some instances of weak writing that hold the plot together. While these bits of writing aren't necessarily wrong, they do not create plot holes, but they're just not persuasive and don't endear us to our protagonists by showing us their resourcefulness. There are a few plot contrivances that make Death Island a little less enjoyable than it should be. When the 4 protagonists first get to Alcatraz Island, the tourists immediately get infected without explanation. The protagonists don't get infected and are the only survivors of the group that come to the island. They are not immune to the T-virus, they are known to the antagonist. The bio-drones have precision targeting, and yet they do not get infected. The only reasons I can see for this is that they have impenetrable plot armor, or the antagonist wanted them alive to monologue at them because he's very, very stupid. The second contrivance is the vaccine that the protagonist received. A scientist lady analyzes the virus from the dead zombies that lead the protagonist to Alcatraz in the first place, and she figures out that it resembles T-viruses that they have encountered before. The problem here is that the protagonists were captured by Dylan Blake and infected. They were dead to rights if they didn't get the vaccine in time. This isn't a Deus Ex Machina, because there's a good amount of setup for it, but an external actor being the only thing between the protagonist and certain doom doesn't feel great. The last major contrivance is the weapons that the protagonists use to defeat the final monster. They didn't bring any with them on the boat because they couldn't. They wanted to pretend to be tourists while investigating the island, so they only had small arms on them. Luckily for them, Alcatraz is being used as a weapons depot as well as a tourist attraction. So now they have access to machine guns mounted on vehicles, a heavy plasma gun, and multiple rocket launchers. Much like with the vaccine, the protagonists didn't display their resourcefulness because the plot bends over backwards to supply them with the weapons they need to defeat Dylan Blake. The animation used in the film is a little rigid, a little janky. Some of the hits in the action sequences lack the weight and the impact that you expect from such heavy strikes. Simply put, the animation is dated and it takes some getting used to. Resident Evil Death Island is a fun action horror adventure film. It does make some mistakes along the way, but it's enjoyable all the same. The problems in the film are far from unfixable. A few plot tweaks and some throwaway lines could easily resolve a lot of the issues I've talked about here. I do wish they put the resources they had to better use though. In the end, I didn't feel like I wasted my time with this long video game cutscene, and I'm interested in previous installments in the series. I do hope they continue to make these because they're really fun.